Before you spend tens of thousands of dollars designing and starting to build an ADU in Fort Collins, you may want to wait because Fort Collins in the city has tried to make it a little bit cheaper for you to do just that. Now, if you've ever thought about building a granny flat, an apartment garage, an attached dwelling unit or an accessory dwelling unit on your building, Fort Collins and the state of Colorado has passed a housing bill that has allowed it to do just that. And at the city council meeting on April 21st, there was an agreement, a vote that passed an agreement to try to get funding, a grant funding, to allow it to become more affordable for people in Fort Collins to build ADUs. Because I will tell you, while it's exciting to consider building a granny flat, an accessory dwelling unit, a garage apartment, it is going to come at a pretty substantial cost. Fees alone could add up to over $25,000, with a garage retrofit expected to cost over $125,000. So we are going to jump into today's video and talk to you all about ADUs, accessory dwelling units in Fort Collins, and should you do it now, or possibly should you wait? My name is Patrick Sukup, and this is the Fort Collins Lifestyle Channel, where we're going to talk to you about specific things that are impacting Fort Collins, Northern Colorado, and home values. So if you are selling your house in Fort Collins, Northern Colorado, share this video because it might help or it might impact the value of that person's property. And if you want to help buy or sell a house here in Northern Colorado, give my team and I a call, text, or email. We would love to be an asset on your team. Let's jump right in. So what is an ADU? Well, an ADU is an accessory dwelling unit, and that has a lot of different implications. Like I said, a granny flat, an apartment above a garage, an attached dwelling unit could become an accessory dwelling unit. So essentially a duplex, but like a basement could become an accessory dwelling unit. Essentially, it is a separate living unit on the same plot of land where a single family detached home currently exists. And the state of Colorado passed a law just a couple years ago that required certain jurisdictions of population sizes of 1,000 or more people to allow for the building of accessory dwelling units. And I will say, the first time I ever, kind of was exposed to an accessory dwelling unit was in Portland. A buddy of mine had a house, and in the backyard there was this little shed, and I was like, well, "What's that?" And he said, "Well, that's my ADU." And I had no idea what that was. And essentially, he had somebody renting out that building to offset some of his mortgage. Now, in Portland, it is pretty commonplace, very accepted for many, many years. And in Fort Collins, and now Northern Colorado and Colorado in general, we are now currently allowed to build ADUs essentially on any lot that a single family home exists. And this could be great for aging parents, kids that are going to college that need a place to stay and offset that, housing expense, rental income to offset the mortgage. There are so many different use cases for this. In fact, you could still build, now you could always do this essentially. You could always build an accessory dwelling, not an accessory dwelling unit, but essentially a separate building for an office space or something along those lines. But the dwelling portion is pretty important because that means there's going to be utilities ran to it, water, sewer, electric, gas. This is a fully functioning, permitted dwelling unit approved by the city of Fort Collins. And you'll see some that have been around for 10, 20 plus years in Old Town Fort Collins, but there was very limited zones in Fort Collins that allowed ADUs to be built. And now essentially in all of Fort Collins, so long as there's a single family detached house there, you can build an ADU. So essentially in February of 2025, after years of the Land Development Code, Land Use Code, LUC, that would try to become the Land Development Code, LDC, there were so many challenges. The city council was trying to say, hey, we want to allow more density in Fort Collins because we believe that could help offset some housing burdens, housing costs. It's already using the lands that's there. There's so many different things that we could do to offset the cost of construction, the cost of land acquisition, and that is very true. But it was met with resistance from portions of Fort Collins. Preserve Fort Collins specifically was the group that was pushing back. And they filed a petition, were able to vote it off. The city council actually repealed it. And then they saw that the state was really pushing this housing bill. And they said, you know what, we'll let the state do our dirty work for us. They passed this bill, officially became jurisdiction requirements. In June of 2025, Fort Collins became a compliant jurisdiction in February of 2025, and you started to see some applications come through the development review process for ADUs on homes. Not a rush of homes by any means, and there is in fact one individual that I met that was very in tune with the city of Fort Collins development process, and she said, I really want to build an ADU, but I'm going to be patient because I don't know what the city of Fort Collins is going to do in regards to permits and what they will do to try to help homeowners build ADUs. They want ADUs in the home, so that's clearly a push, a priority for the city council. They've been told and now clearly understand it's expensive and there are requirements for the citizens of Fort Collins to build these ADUs. So how are we going to address this? And I'm not to say, every single house, every single lot is going to be allowed to build an ADU, because there's still going to be setbacks and easements, lot size, house size versus ADU size. So there are still going to be HOA requirements. Now, HOAs can't restrict the building of an HOA. They can give you some guidelines for the design, which will impact what we'll talk about here shortly of what Fort Collins just did to try to offset some of those cost implications. But there's still going to be plenty of requirements to try to make these ADUs fit within the envelope and feel of these neighborhoods and developments, not just like smushed as much closely together as you can, because I have heard in San Francisco there'll be shotgun type lots with 4 units on it and they're just stacked on top of each other, mishmashed together. But because it's so valuable to have property in that area, people have made it work. Councils have passed laws to allow it, and the city of Fort Collins, I think, are trying to do a really good job of easing into and still preserving some of the character of these neighborhoods. But the size of the ADU could be capped at anywhere between 750 square feet up to 1,000 square feet, depending on the size of the main house. So if you're looking next door and you're seeing what looks like a shed but might be a lot bigger, it very well could be an accessory dwelling unit. And cheat code, go into the development review process, you can search an address, it will show you if that address has been approved for, what process they're in, and there's usually going to be a yellow development under review sign in that yard. So there will be signs if you're gonna have a neighbor that's building an ADU, which I will get to here shortly as well. Now, one of the major sticking points of these ADUs is how expensive it could be to build an ADU. Now, I will say, what's crazy is I just had a house fire at one of my rental properties, and it's a detached garage, and the cost of reconstruction literally floored me. I got the estimate back from the restoration company, which I don't love restoration companies because I do feel they take advantage of insurance companies. But that being said, it was a $90,000 reconstruction cost. And I'm talking about this detached garage was just one car of the 2-car detached garages was impacted. And there was some soffit siding and roof and all that kind of stuff, but $90,000, it was crazy. And some examples of fee schedules for an ADU for a retrofitted garage could add up to $25,000 plus just in fees. And then the actual cost estimation of a job with an existing structure could be north of $125,000. Some cost per square foot that I've been told from builders could be anywhere between $250 to $350 really on the minimum side these days, especially kind of for these smaller off projects. Now that's all encompassing with utilities and planning fees and permits and build and all that kind of stuff. Not necessarily the land because you already own the land, but these ADUs can be exorbitantly expensive. Now, the cool thing is there's lots of different financing strategies that you could do. You could take a HELOC out of your house. You could finance the build of the ADU because there is going to be a value increase to your house and to your property. So there are financing structures, but it's not like, hey, listen, I'm going to pull $100,000 out of my 401k and I'm going to build this ADU. It's probably going to be closer to like $200,000, $300,000 to build this small structure between 600 to 1,000 square feet. So you've got to plan accordingly, and that's where the city of Fort Collins is trying, and the state of Colorado is trying to address some of these concerns as far as expenses. So on April 21st, the city council passed essentially a resolution that said, hey, we want to go after this grant program. Only $157,000, but the way that this money will be divided will be about $90,000 or so are going to go to 2 pre-approved designs for ADUs in Fort Collins. One of the big expenses is going to be, the design, architecture, all of those kind of expenses on before you even put a dirt in the shovel, and then having to go through these kind of design review process at the city of Fort Collins. That can take time and money, whereas these designs will be essentially a library of 2, and I think they're going to want to increase this library of pre-approved designs in Fort Collins so that somebody could come in and say like, no, I want to go to that one, already been pre-approved. Then of course you've got to go through, get site work done, grading, utilities, all of that kind of stuff still has to go through, but essentially you do have the architecture done, the design, everything's approved from the city of Fort Collins, energy efficient build, and you can pick and choose it. The next $60,000 or so are going to go towards fee reductions. Now, again, we talked about how expensive fees can be, so I wouldn't expect this to be a complete offsetting of these fees, but I will suggest that they're going to say, hey, listen, you want to build an ADU? $1,000. We got a $60,000, treasure chest. We're gonna give $1,000 so we can give it to 60 people. Now, the $1 million question that everyone is asking: can ADUs increase the value of your home? And in fact, I was just playing around with AI the other day about, renovation projects and how they could impact your house on a return on investment. And a lot of these investments are because I want to invest in those, deals. Like a bathroom remodel might be 75 cents on the dollar. So I might invest $10,000 and get $7,500 increase in value. So that's an important question to ask yourself when you're making these types of investments. So don't automatically assume that if you're going to invest $250,000 into an ADU, that your property value is going to increase by $250,000. I would suggest that, just like I tell a lot of clients and people that are finishing their basements, don't do it as an investment. Do it because you need to or want to. Like for me, we finished our basement because, well, we had a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom ranch upstairs. And we had 1 kid ourselves, and then we were pregnant with another one, and we enjoyed having our in-laws come, and they stayed in the guest room. And so we're like, okay, well, we're either selling this house and buying a new one, or we're finishing the basement. So we ultimately did finish the basement, added another 2 bedrooms, so it's a 5-bedroom, 3.5 bathroom house now, to where we can have all of the rooms occupied by kids or guests. We didn't look at the investment dollars. Yes, of course, it was a consideration for us, but it wasn't an investment for us. And the same thing goes true for ADUs. Absolutely, it's going to increase the value of your property because there's now flexibility. You can use it for home office, which I think is very important. 20% of Fort Collins people are working from home. In-laws that want to come and stay for 2-3 months. Rental income. Sure, your mortgage, $4,000, you can rent out your ADU for $2,000. All of a sudden, your mortgage feels closer to $2,000. I think there's a tremendous value there. Or you got a mother-in-law or grandma or whoever that might be who would otherwise be put into a home where they're charging $10,000, $14,000, $20,000 per month to have, in-home assistance. And I'm not saying this is right for everybody, but I'm saying, hey, you could build an ADU for $250,000, finance it. Maybe that costs you $2,000, $3,000 a month in a mortgage payment, but it offsets $10,000 a month where your mom would be at a home otherwise, and you can there care for her, maintain, all that kind of stuff, if, of course, there's a lot of different things to consider in that regard. But I would say there are a ton of value and uses for ADUs, but depending on the lot size, depending on where you put it, if you have to kind of force it in there, if it doesn't necessarily fit the vibe, or maybe the neighbor has an ADU that's covering the shade. I will say one thing that I've thought about where we would build an ADU on our house is we have a good sized lot. I know where I'd put the ADU, but I'm really concerned about what that would do to my neighbor because they have a garden right there. And I will say that would impact immediately the amount of sun that her garden gets. And she loves gardening. And I'm like, is it worth investing, getting the rental income, or having a place for my mom or dad or whatever, like in the future? Not at this point. So I'm not making that investment, and I don't have the need or desire for it. Yes, I'm working right now in our basement in a dungeon, no windows, in a small corner, so my wife doesn't love me. But no, I mean, absolutely she loves me. But I've thought about, hey, like it'd be cool to have a little small studio space for 500 square feet that has a Murphy bed pull down so that when the in-laws come, they've got their own kitchenette, they've got their own space, they can go out, they can literally feel detached from us so they don't feel like they're impeding on our space, anything along those lines. But it hasn't become a strong enough need for me. And on the investment side, I'm like, no, I'm not great there. But as a property investor, I do have some properties that have larger lots, and I always play the percentage rules. So if I have a rental property, or if I have two options that let's say I have $250,000 cash sitting on the sidelines, and I can go and invest in a property. I can let's just call it a $500,000 property, and I can put $250,000 down, so 50% down. My mortgage will be $1,500, $2,000, and that rent will probably be about $2,000 to about $2,200, $2,500, which is great. But the mortgage takes away, a big chunk of that. I cash flow $500. So my percentage based off of the purchase price of it is about half of, I get 0.5% based off of the value of the home. So $2,500 for a $500,000 house. Or I could go find a property that I already own, build a $250,000 ADU, 1,000 square foot ADU or 800 square foot ADU, and rent it out for $1,500 or $1,700. And my rent to price ratio makes a lot more sense, and my return on investment starts to be a little bit more attractive. And then I could supercharge it. I could finance it, use leverage dollars. I'm not a big finance person. But anyways, those are serious things to consider on where and how to place money, especially if you already own property and already own land. But as far as the value of your house in Fort Collins, understand if you're selling a house that has a third of an acre or a fourth of an acre and no HOA, and you can absolutely build an ADU, your property value has increased. The best use case for your property has increased. Prior, all you could have was a single family detached house on a great big lot. And let's say that lot value was $100,000. Well, now maybe it's worth $150,000 or $175,000 or $200,000 because to somebody else, they have this third of an acre and they're like, I've got a brother who can't afford to buy a house. They've been wanting to move to northern Colorado and they would be able to live here by themselves in their own place. And we could buy this house for $600,000 and then build an ADU for $850,000. So essentially you're buying two houses for $400,000 versus having to buy two separate $500,000 houses. A lot of things to consider on the value of land. So seriously, the value of land is probably what has been increased the most in Fort Collins for people who want and need to build ADUs. Okay, so does it increase the home value? Yeah, maybe. Land value, sure, depending on how you and what you want to use for the ADUs. But should you wait or do it now? And I will say, if you have the flexibility to wait, I'm 100% waiting. So they just agreed on this resolution to go after this grant. The state of Colorado is going to award the grants in Q2 of 2026. Then the city of Fort Collins has to appropriate funds. So probably by the time they get appropriated and used and allocated, it's going to be about late 2026, early 2027 at the earliest. So I will say, if you have the flexibility to wait and you have the ability to choose or desire to choose maybe one of these two library designs, along with seeking some of this relief on fee waivers, yeah, wait 6 to 12 months. It'll probably save you anywhere between $5,000 to $20,000 on design fees, permit fees, and I will say I think that's incredibly important. Now, if you're already in the review process and you've gone through some of these, yeah, sure, rock and roll. If you need the granny flat, start to finish, I'm looking at probably 12 to 24 months from submitting a design to shoveling the dirt and move-in ready for an ADU. So if you need that property and you don't have the ability to wait or can't afford to wait, yeah, sure, start today. We're still talking, $5, $10, $15, $20,000 of savings, which is significant. But if you need the property today and you're gonna spend $10,000 a month on in-home care, maybe that isn't worth waiting for. But while you wait, that doesn't mean that you can't go and start asking some questions. The city of Fort Collins is open to answering a lot of questions as far as setbacks and easements and use and what you could build on it, how big it could be. And these are a lot of questions that you can then start to go, talk to architects, art designers, and builders and getting quotes from and starting to put the financing together so that when the 6 to 12 months has passed, you're essentially prepared and ready to go. Or, hey, listen, the only thing I can build is a 400 square foot ADU here, and we really need 650 square feet because we need a bedroom and a studio type of area. So those are questions that you can really start to explore today, kind of get your ducks in a row to then be ready for when those design fees come into play, as well as that library of designs comes for the ADUs that you can choose and pick from. So while I don't think ADUs are gonna just pop up everywhere in Fort Collins, I do think they work for certain people, certain individuals, and figuring out the financing and the setbacks and the design libraries. And there's a lot of different things that are still going to move forward with the city of Fort Collins, especially with their priority of affordable housing. That's gonna say, how else can we help homeowners build ADUs? Because it's gonna offset some demand on rentals, maybe even offset some demand on housing prices because, like I said, that story from the brother moving from out of state into Fort Collins, and now they can buy 2 properties for total $800,000 versus 2 properties for $1 million plus. There are a lot of different pushes and priorities for the city of Fort Collins for affordable housing where they might not stop here. So that's a serious consideration as well, as whether should you wait or start now. It's like, okay, I've got the 2 choices for the library of designs, and I've got a $1,000 fee waiver maybe, but in the future, will Fort Collins provide a financing program? Will they provide a fee kickback? Will they provide fee waivers? There's so many different things that could happen because this is now a new thing in Fort Collins where, yes, I don't think you're gonna get upset. You build an ADU and 5 years later something happens where you're like, I probably could have saved $5,000 to $10,000. But in the meantime, I was able to increase my rental income by $2,000 a month that I would have never had. So I wouldn't say necessarily if the desire is there, the demand's there, as I'm waiting forever. But I will say that the city of Fort Collins has a big push to push ADUs into and around Fort Collins. So depending on your location, your property size, your setbacks, your easements, where you sit, your house sits on the property, your land value might have just increased substantially. And if you're seriously considering building an ADU in the next 6 to 12 months, you might be able to save $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 on designs and fee waivers. Now, if you have somebody in your area that is considering building an ADU, send them this video. If you're looking at buying a property in Fort Collins with the consideration of building an ADU, talk to us. We'd be happy to help you. And if you're selling a property that has the great potential to build an ADU, understand the value of that property. Reach out to us, call us. My name is Patrick Sukup. This is the Fort Collins lifestyle video. Appreciate you guys watching, and until next time, have a great day.